Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. This is episode 12 of my COVID 19 series. It is June 14th, 2020. COVID 19 is a coronavirus. We're in a pandemic, millions of cases, hundreds of thousands of people dying. And what a morbid introduction, right? But if you're listening to this in the future, just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what's going on. And I did 100 episodes, and most of them were, evergreen episodes where you can listen to whenever. It's not about what's going on right now, maybe about what the person's doing, but mostly about their story. I took a little break to be a stay-at-home dad for a bit, and then I got a full-time job as an insolvency counselor in Canada. And I was taking a break from the podcast. I decided to come back for COVID because I wanted to talk about what's going on, and I have a platform to do so. I wanted to connect with people who I've met, people from around the world, people with different experiences, people in different places. Um, and this has become very important to me to do every week. I don't edit the show anymore, so this is just one full recording. Because again, I wasn't doing the show because I didn't have the time to do it. And I didn't want that to be an excuse for me to not do this every week, so I just sort of adjusted the way that I do it. We're just going to talk about stuff, and this is what it is. I'm not going to edit out all of my ums as I used to do, and there's going to be a bunch of them because we can't stop saying right? I don't know how we stop, but I mean, listening to myself helps me. So, episode 12 of this series, June 14th, 2020, I have Kassandra Dasent on the show. Welcome, Kassandra.
Thank you, Bo. Thanks for having me. Happy to be
So,
here.
yes, happy to have you. We met at FinCon, which is something we can talk about as well. FinCon in DC last year, so September 2019,
Yep,
and Sonia Smith Valentine introduced us, and she's been on the podcast. That's a great episode.
yeah, she's a
And
good
you,
friend of mine.
yes, she's fantastic. Lawyer, CPA, financially fierce, right?
Right.
And she definitely is that, which is amazing. And you have a really interesting story, which we talked about just a few minutes ago. You will come back and do that, and we'll talk about that full story. And in the meantime, I will put links to the Rich and Regular podcast and Journey to Launch. I like those podcasts, and you tell your story well on those. If anyone wants to just learn a little bit more about Kassandra's background, but we're going to just start with your COVID story now, and in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted you, just personally, financially. What are the rules where you are? But first, where were you when all this went down? And do you remember?
Yeah, sitting at home. Uh, I currently live in Orange Park. I was born in Trinidad in the West Indies, and immigrated to Montreal, Canada with my mother at the age of 6. So I lived in Montreal for over 30 years. So je suis très
You're
québécoise and
Canadian.
Canadian.
Uh,
Yeah. Um,
That'd be
However, I've been living in the United States for over almost 7 years now,
okay.
due to marrying my husband, who's also Trinidadian, but lived in the United States when I met him. Um, so, yeah, sitting in Orange Park, paying attention to the news, and quickly realizing that we have a huge problem on our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very personal for me very quickly for a couple of reasons. And the first reason is my mom, because I'm a long distance caregiver. I travel to Montreal frequently to visit her. She lives in a senior's home. And so when Quebec started to have a drastic increase in cases and they became the
Yeah,
epicenter for Canada,
in the long-term care facilities.
it that
Yeah.
exactly that was where it was hardest
Wow.
hit. And to this day, fortunately, her seniors home is one of the very few that has not reported one case.
Wow. Okay. That's good
So
to hear.
it's
Yeah.
yes, and it's really due to their very quick response and adaptation to the new normal, and putting patients first, putting their employees first as well. the lockdown was swift. To this day, they're still locked down. They've allowed visitation to where the patient will be brought outside, the resident will be brought outside, but you still have to be 2 meters apart minimum. You still have to
Okay.
wear the mask. You still have to wear the protective gear. Um, and if you wanted to go inside, you'd have to fill a bunch of forms out. It's very strict protocol. You have to take the test. It's actually a disincentive for people to want to visit inside the home
Yeah.
in order to protect the residents, which I fully agree with. However, what it does for family members, especially those like me who don't live in Montreal, I can't just drive up and say, I've got
Yeah.
to take a plane or I've got to take a 20-hour road trip.
Yeah.
And then before this week, the Canadian border is still severely restricted, right? It's non-essential travel is not allowed. It's really about importation of goods and
Yes.
essential
Just keeping
service
business,
workers,
like keeping the
keeping business
economy
alive,
going.
right?
Yeah.
So I would have been allowed to re-enter Canada at any time since I'm a citizen, right?
That's true. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my
Good point.
husband wouldn't have been able to come with me.
Okay.
So now, recently, Trudeau relaxed the laws for immediate family members. However, you do need to self-quarantine once you enter the country for 14 days.
Of course.
So, even then, it's great, but you have to essentially plan to be in the country for at least 3 weeks to
Yeah.
even see
Before
your
you can
mother
see someone, so
before you
you
can
then get a
see
hotel
some.
2 weeks,
Exactly, the
work
cost,
from a hotel, and
right?
then,
And then
hmm,
you still don't get to hug your loved ones. Well, in my case, I cannot because she's in a
no.
senior's home.
And that's a really good point. My wife and my son visited my parents on the way back from a trip, and they socially distanced. And my mom said that it was harder. It's so much harder. Like, no, when we talk on the video, she doesn't get sad when we leave, but
Hmm.
when they were socially distanced, she got sad. And
Exactly.
that there's a big difference there, right? So like it's like a tease, right? If you go close.
Exactly. So we were throwing about whether we should go or not. And last night we made the decision to pause the idea because I know my mom, and I know the first instinct she would do is to want to hug me,
Of
right?
course,
It's
yeah.
been almost 7 months because I had seen her last November, and I had planned my flight to return in March, and then I had to cancel
March,
my flight. So
of course,
it's
right then. Yeah.
right. So we decided that let's wait a little longer. Let's see what happens with COVID. Let's see how many cases are dropping per day and if it's a consistent drop. And let's follow the numbers for a bit. But more importantly, psychologically, she's doing okay on the phone. The nurse has been gracious to do FaceTime or Skype with her. So we've been able to see each other.
Okay,
Um,
that's good.
but that's one of my reality. And then the other reality is that I'm a stepmother to an 11-year-old.
Oh,
I don't know, will he be 13 this year? 12 or 13? I've got to double check the numbers, but he's a teenager, and he
yeah.
lives in Trinidad with his mom. And of course, Trinidad has shut its borders as well. So we don't know when we'll be able to see him either,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah.
So yeah, it really has affected us personally. Again, we've got communication at our disposal. We're able to message and Skype and stuff, but not having the control over when you can do something and how you can do something.
And
It,
when it's going to end.
yeah,
What's the future look like? That's the hardest part about all of this. You
exactly.
can't plan,
No, you
right?
cannot plan. No.
And how has it affected? Were you working from home typically already?
So I was commuting. I'm self-employed, so I had a contract.
Mm.
So for the most part, I was commuting, and then with the company that I am contracting for, um, they one of their safety is actually one of their values.
Okay.
And so from a safety standpoint, when the city of Jacksonville, I live about 30 minutes outside of Jacksonville proper. So when the city of Jacksonville, it was actually one of the first cities within the state to go under quarantine, if you will,
Yeah.
even before the governor said that Florida itself. So the mayor, I have to give him credit for acting quickly on that front at the beginning, closing down beaches and stuff like that. So the company decided, okay, let's get ready for remote workforce, 5,000 plus. The company was
Oh,
already actually
big
well
company.
advanced. Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
company around the world. But they had the infrastructure to support it, which a
They
lot
did.
of companies didn't have.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's
this
right.
this company had the infrastructure to support it. It took less than a day for me to get completely set up with the right, security access and tokens and stuff like that. And I've been at home since mid-March.
So
And
income hasn't been affected in terms of like that, but
well,
maybe
for
other
me,
opportunities.
no. My husband, yes, severely.
Okay.
My husband is a sound
Okay.
engineer. He's a live
Oh yeah,
he's a
yeah.
he's a
I
live
think
sound
you said he
engineer.
was touring, right?
Yeah, he's touring.
On the other podcast. So was he touring with big names too?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that has all completely stopped, right? There's no
Mm-hmm.
known date where you're going to open a concert, hall or stadiums.
Yep.
We he foresees maybe mid 2021, like before late 2021, before you get back to the near levels of where he was touring before, where he was home maybe 2-3 months of the year.
Yeah, I used to work for Live Nation Global Touring
Mm.
in finance, and I was the manager of tour finance. So I know a lot of people in this business, and I mean, I used to work at the Air Canada Center as well.
Mm.
So watching all of these events get canceled, all these tours get canceled, and I know there's insurance for all this stuff, but that doesn't help the workers.
Nope.
Was he able to go on an employment insurance of some kind in
Oh
the
my
U.S.?
God, that's
How does that work?
the saga that is still ongoing. So, um, the state of Florida doesn't obviously cover self-employed, right? But
Sure.
when the CARES Act was passed on March 29th, it did
Yes.
include a provision for self-employed workers.
Okay.
We applied. Do you know we're still waiting? And now we have the
Oh,
governor's office involved because his case is so left field that, I think we've had to apply 5 times. We inputted all the information, like don't even, I was like so upset. Like, I'm very competent. I know how to
yeah, exactly.
I know how to
You did
read the
your
instructions.
diligence. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, we had to get the local government involved, and then they realized, okay, we're not getting anywhere, and they were resubmitting his name like every week on the reports. And so now we put in a, I forget, special request at the governor level, which is not very common to do. So it's 3+ months he hasn't seen a payment.
Wow.
Yeah.
And should we acknowledge that you are in a more privileged position than most, and you might have some savings
Yep.
and assets and
I will disclose that.
yeah.
Yes, I'm working, right? Financially, we're very solvent in the sense that even my income, we don't need all of my income to survive, right?
Yeah.
We have high costs because I care for my mom, we care for
Well,
my
yeah.
stepson, right? So our
Yeah.
costs are definitely not cheap, but I will definitely say that we're very blessed, we're very fortunate. And I have a healthy emergency savings fund. We have investments. Like, we are not in a situation where it's we're potentially losing our home, or we have to question what food we need to buy. So I want to preface all that by saying that we are fortunate,
But
um
given that you worked your butt off to get to where you are
yeah.
now, right? To
Yeah.
build all of this up, and this is taking away that ability to sustain that building of the wealth.
Yeah, and it's funny, even if even though we're in a healthy financial position, it doesn't stop me from worrying,
Yeah. Oh,
because
for sure. Yeah.
I too, like, look at the company that I work like currently contract for. They furloughed hundreds of people. They laid off
Yeah.
hundreds of others. We renegotiated my contract rate temporarily to help them.
Okay.
So it's not
So
like,
you've taken a bit of
oh yeah, I've
a
taken a
cut.
bit of a
Yeah.
pay cut, right?
Okay.
So because I understand the current position that we're in, companies are having to make hard choices, and some companies have a better balance sheet than others.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's no different than personal finance and corporate
That's right.
finance,
Yeah.
right?
You either have the emergency fund or you
Or
don't.
you don't.
And so when something like this happens, if you're not ready, then a lot of people got to go in a
Hmm.
business, and that really sucks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know if we can ask in the future to see a company's cash flow before we take a job. What do you think? Should that be the thing? Like, hey, what do you have for emergency? What happens if there's another pandemic? Will you be okay? Like,
Well, the thing is that for the public companies, it's quite easy. They have to
yeah,
publish
good point.
their corporate
Yeah.
statements, and also you look from a stock market perspective. How are they trading? What are their dividends? All this stuff. So it's not like you can't piece together the health of the company. It's more the
Hmm.
small and medium,
Yeah,
like privately listed companies that are right now hurting in the COVID situation, right? So, for
that's right.
example, when the CARES Act was passed, and then you have the loan programs, the paycheck protection programs, and the loan disaster programs by the Small Business Administration in the United States. Well, the majority of that, what I think it's a total of $511 billion, went to big corporations because
Yeah, I heard that.
it's because the preferential treatment by their lenders, by the banks, right? The
Of
banks are
course.
more comfortable lending to the big dollar companies who they feel that they have a better chance of recuperating the loan itself.
So they're still going by risk
Oh,
tolerance for
absolutely.
themselves. They have to. That's how they
That's how they
operate.
survive,
Yeah,
right?
I've been hearing that the money has run out for small businesses. You
Oh,
know that?
and worse yet for businesses, from the Black and Brown communities, they most
Yeah.
have not seen a penny. They haven't even been able to, let's say, get processed for a loan. It's very one-sided. Again, it just supports this whole belief that the system is really for the few and not for the many. You
Yeah,
know?
so this the lack of availability of funding for the Black and Brown communities, is that specifically because of the systemic racism that is built into the banking system?
So you could probably trace it back because, and people may disagree with my thinking. However, just to get funding, just to get venture capital dollars,
Yeah,
it's almost impossible. Many Black and Brown businesses are solo entrepreneur business, or maybe one or two employees, right? For the banks, they see those as higher risk, right?
sure.
Secondly, it could be a combination where Black and Brown people may not have as high credit score as someone who is white. Okay,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
I cannot prove that for statistics, but I wouldn't be surprised. There's so many reasons why we are disadvantaged. You have systemic policies in place, like the old redlining in the States, the FHA policy, when
yeah,
Blacks and Browns were not at first able to get home ownership and mortgage loans, right? And then eventually laws was passed to try to give them access, but they were given at higher rates than whites. They were
of
also
course.
segregated where you could live in a certain area of a town and not. So
Redlining. Yeah.
redlining, that's what redlining is.
And the 1974 Equal Opportunity Loan
Yep.
Act, is that what it was
Yep.
called?
Yep.
So that just made it illegal to discriminate, but it didn't stop discrimination.
No.
Like something I've been hearing a lot lately is they what they teach about like slavery and stuff. Oh, slavery happened and then it ended and now everything's good, and that's kind of like how they gloss over it in school. And the thing is, I mean, in civil rights and all the movements, whenever all that sort of settled down, it took a different form, didn't it?
Oh, it became covert. It
Hmm.
became, as we say in French, souterrain.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
underground. Yeah,
underground, underneath, passive. There's so many ways you could describe it. The thing is that they made, they just found legal ways of subverting our access and
hmm,
and limiting our ability to raise capital or build wealth, or just give us more control over our own money per se. So there was just other ways of just showing that we still don't regard you as equal. We still
yeah,
don't
yes.
consider you as a people that deserve to be at the same status as we are. So it still flows into to today. You see it as the protesters, and just as we're living in this um current wave of anger and current wave of trying to bring attention to the injustices that have never stopped, that never left. um I was on another podcast the other day, and I was saying I'm personally in pain. I'm
Hmm.
personally suffering because not because of my own experiences with racism, because I've been subject to racist remarks and experiences, but to see that a life is still not regarded as equal because our skin color is not the same. And that and I'm talking specifically about George Floyd.
Sure.
And when I watched that video and seeing that officer's knee on his neck, and the stance that he took of superiority,
Yeah, it really seemed like he was proud
he was
almost.
proud.
He was
He
proud.
and that
Oh,
that that just brought back the images of, from the 1960s and 50s, and beyond, where it's just like, wow, we're still living like, if you believe that we have overcome, you're sadly
no.
mistaken.
It's still there, and we just haven't been seeing it
Mm,
as much. And now the only reason why it's sort of back in front and center is because now more people are able to see it,
yes.
right?
Video is
But it's
the best
always
thing
been
ever.
there.
Yeah.
It's been there the whole time, and you, I mean, you can attest to that.
Yeah, the entire time. I remember in Montreal, and it's always a story I tell just to give context, where
Hmm.
because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I grew up in Point Claire in the suburbs.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, white Anglo Saxon. I went to Lindsay Place High School. A lot of Jewish people attended that high school.
Sure.
So I grew up very far from my own community. In my home, culturally, yes, I grew up in a West Indian culture with music and food and everything. So I never lost that. However, from an educational perspective, I went to a French immersion school. I'm fluently bilingual. I don't
Hmm.
sound West Indian. I don't sound Black. I don't sound African American, or whatever, how people describe how we sound. I don't sound
Sure.
that, right?
Yeah.
So I applied for a job interview back in the day in Montreal, and no problem. I was invited to the interview. I show up, and she walked in, and you could tell her face was like shocked.
Oh.
And she's like,
Oh.
she's like, well, you don't look like how you sound in French. And I said, ah ouais, okay.
Well.
I don't think I need to be here. And I walked
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
you know?
Good.
But
I mean, good for you. Not good for her.
no, well, yeah, but I can imagine a lot of people would have been just like, I'll swallow that because I need a job.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Another thing about being financially independent or having financial freedom to do stuff, and most people don't have that
Hmm.
ability.
Yeah.
And so you might have had to take that job if you're in a different mindset or different position.
And keep in mind, I was in my 20s at that time, and I was, starting my way into the debt journey, which, we'll talk about probably another time we're together. But even
Hmm.
then, I had a sense of self that
Good. Yeah.
I knew I didn't need her. I could get another job. I had that confidence in myself that this is not acceptable. I can do better. I knew that even then. But to the point that we're talking about, where having money does give you a sense of freedom to be able to make choices that align with your values and your beliefs. So now I'm in a position where I can be choosy and picky about which contracts I accept, that who I want to work for, because I have the financial security to back me up. Whereas so many around the world do not, and that's a privilege and that's a luxury that I have built for myself and my family, right?
You had to build that up, but you also have the generational burden
Yeah.
of your mother, right? And I don't know, that's not, for some reason that's not a negative, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
right? Which I, for example, do not have,
Hmm.
because my parents built up wealth for
Right.
themselves, and they're taking care of themselves. And to be completely honest, this is something I'm only becoming aware of recently. In terms of first gen, so people in the U.S.,
Hmm.
right, where there are parents that expect to be taken care of, and I don't have that in my life.
Yeah.
And so I can, not only do I have support from my parents, I don't have to support them, and so all of my money is mine, and I have the ability to make more money, it's like everything adds on to itself for privilege,
Yeah,
right?
and you see
You
as
see
you
the
see the
layers
layers
of
of it,
privilege,
right?
and I have all of them. I mean, you could say maybe a mental health one because I had an addiction, and but then I'm in Canada, so I got free mental
You
health
have the resources to,
therapy, and I got help and medication. So it's like even if you try to find the lack of privilege in my life, it's like, well, but then this compensates for this and that. So when you contrast my experience to say, well, yours,
hmm
or someone who wasn't even able to build up, like, you know, what is it? Was it drive for you? What separated you? Do you get more opportunities? I think you mentioned somebody kind of helped you along, like helped you move the dial along,
yeah,
because that's a big
absolutely.
movement too, moving the dial for women in tech, and I mean people of color in tech as well.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that?
sure. So for sure the drive came from my mom. So I'll start with
Mm,
her, right? So even she immigrated to Montreal knowing nobody. She just had a dream, literally saying that
okay.
I want better for my daughter. I'm the last of six children, and her first five, she was in an arranged marriage. She's Indian, my mom, and I happen to be a multiracial. But so, long story short, she wanted more for me, that she couldn't necessarily give her first five kids.
Yeah.
So she saw an opportunity, got a visa, came to Canada, was able to sponsor me. And she just wanted to do what she could to put me in a more advantageous situation, living in suburbia, going to the best school she could manage. Then it was up to me to determine my course in life, right? Look, another thing, education in Quebec, we were heavily subsidized for college and university compared to
Yeah.
our
Okay.
American counterparts.
With the CEGEP
Right,
too,
CEGEP
right?
as
Yeah.
well, right? So the cost was essentially what? Registration and books, pretty much.
Okay. Wow.
So we didn't carry that level of student loan debt. So I had a very um, fair advantage in that sense because of where I grew up and the people that I came along to meet. So when it came to transitioning into a world of tech, I was at a company called Oakley, and
Okay.
sunglasses company, and
Yeah. Oakley's. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I had an 11 plus year career there, and I started off as a
Okay.
credit analyst. Um,
Yes.
and I knew that, and that was the time I was working to pay off debt, but I knew that I wanted to earn more. And I knew a way to do it was I needed to get myself into a new career. But how? I didn't finish my back. It's not easy to just jump into tech like that. So
Yeah.
a position came up within the company that was tech related, and nobody really was interested in it. And I said to myself, if I can convince them to send me off to like a boot camp to learn how to,
Yeah.
to do it, I will do what I can to excel. So that's, again, it's just an inner drive that I've learned over the years.
Yeah.
And my manager was sold on the idea, and I had three mentors in that company, all females in positions of management, and they advocated for me. They helped me to open those doors. If I didn't have them, I
Yeah.
know I wouldn't be as successful as I am today.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right, because I mean, one of my early episodes, I spoke to three guys from Uganda, who were happened to be at a conference that I was at here, and they talked about personal finance in East Africa.
hmm
One of them worked for the UN, and he didn't coin this, but he said, talent is universal, opportunity is not.
Exactly.
And so you and many people probably had that drive, right? But the opportunity just happened to be there for you. And what's happening in the US is the opportunities are not there for the majority of people of
No.
color. I'll say black people because I've been interchanging, and I realize that saying people of color versus in this specific case, I should say black people, right? Because
Yeah,
that's what's happening.
it's a word, people of color. And I understand when white allies, they're trying to figure out what is the best,
Yeah. What is the best?
terminology to use.
Yeah.
What how should
Yeah.
I approach you guys? And I've chosen to, let's say, don't lump us into just one other group. It's like minorities. I don't like the
Yeah,
term
don't say
minorities.
minorities. Yeah.
People of color is too broad.
Yeah.
We're blacks, we're Latinx, we're Asians, we're indigenous. Say what
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
there's no shame in saying what we are. And just like you are a white person, that is the
Yeah.
description that you are.
Good.
So
Good
yeah,
to
if we're
know.
talking about in the context of blacks and browns, like, and I always say browns, I talk about Indians, Asians,
Well, yeah, I mean, because like you said, you have your parents are,
my parents are, I'm
yeah,
mixed, right?
yes,
But yeah, to your point, it's just, if you don't if you're not presented with the potential or the opportunities or people who are willing to advocate for you, it makes it near impossible to level up in life. And I have been afforded those opportunities and key people, and then I made the most of it. So
yes.
there's the two factor, right?
You gotta use it
You've got to
for
use
good.
it, and you've got to
Yeah,
milk it for all it's worth. And then
yeah.
there's a third element, which is pay it
Okay,
back,
yes.
bring someone else with you. Because for me, it's not good enough to say, okay, I'm doing well, I'm living well, I'm succeeding. I need to now return that gift to somebody else and mentor him or her and help bring that person where they can now pay. It's like a cycle. For me, it's just a continuous cycle.
You got to keep doing that, and we have, because we have to break whatever's happening.
Yeah.
And would you say that what's happening right now seems? I feel like people are saying this is a little bit different than previous situations where we're trying to break the cycle. Would you do you feel that way?
I hope so.
There's always hope. Yeah.
There's
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
so. It does feel different for me. It felt different, and not that the deaths of Breonna Taylor or Philando
Mm.
Castile or Tamir Rice or any of the hundreds and thousands before them don't matter. They all led cumulatively to this point, and not one
Yes.
should have, right?
Yeah.
I think, again, to the credit of video is so powerful, right? It's such a powerful medium. And I think Officer Chauvin, and I want to call his name because that is his name,
Yep.
that
Yep.
who put his knee on George's neck. Um, that stance of white superiority, and the fact I said it, like, he looked like, I own you,
Yeah.
I own you. I own you from head to toe. That that resonated powerfully in many of us. Like, it disgusted us. It completely overwhelmed me psychologically. Like, no, this cannot be. So now that you've got protests in, what, we're week 2 now, I think. I
I
don't
think so.
I think
Yeah.
we're in week 2. Keep in mind, like I said on another podcast episode, that from the Civil Rights Act that was passed, we become complacent. Every
Yes.
one of us have become complacent. We took our foot off the gas pedal. This is an issue that in order to eradicate it, you cannot ever stop. You cannot ever let up. Just
Hmm.
because government may pass a legislation, don't think that it ends there. You need to see them actually enact it and put it to use in the context that you intend it for. And you need to see it just happening in everyday life, where you see more and more people are now understanding the true systemic issue of racism. So it's not just, okay, well, oh, it's not fair to treat somebody badly because of the color of their skin. No, we're talking from a law standpoint that it is not acceptable, and you will be punished as a result of it. When people start feeling the effects, the
Consequences.
consequences of their behaviors,
Yes.
like this officer, that he still might end up with $1 million pension, even though he murdered somebody.
Some of them are already, they're talking about some who are already on their pensions. They
Right.
were retired after doing these things. And it just doesn't, now it doesn't seem right, like when people are calling it out. And hopefully by calling it out, we can change something.
Yeah, and people may ask, well, what can I do, or how can I contribute? And you may not want to protest. You don't have to protest, in
Hmm.
that way. And I always say, the power you have is your vote matters. People don't understand, like, your vote can swing a country one way to another. from one
Yeah.
ideal to another. And you do
Yes.
this at the local level. Start paying attention to who your city councilors are. Start paying attention to who the new judges they want to put on in the circuit, or in the Supreme Court, or in your local. That's where your life happens on the day-to-day level, on a micro level, is in your own community. So you need to start, paying attention to how your dollars are spent.
Mm.
It's things at the granular level that will then affect you at a more state and federal level. So it's not only the vote for the next, who's the next president or who the next prime minister is, it's who's the next city councilor on the board of your companies. Start looking at who do you work for? Does your company represent the ideals that you believe in? Does, if they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, are they living what they preach? Is their board reflective? Not only their board, is their C-suite reflective? Is it just, oh, there's the Asian token one? Okay, well, we checked off the box. You have to question what your personal ideals and beliefs are. From there, you have to then see how that can be amplified in every aspect of your life. That's how you can really start. Of course,
Mm.
education, of course, having those honest and sometimes very uncomfortable conversations. But we have to start thinking macro and micro. It's two fronts that we need to fight this fight.
And listening to, well, hopefully this podcast, for example, but any other podcasts that where people are talking with different voices, because what I've found for me specifically is just hearing things presented in a different way
Mm,
will resonate with different people. Like, I listened to Shawn Rochester on the Journey to Launch. He wrote the Black Tax book,
yes.
which again, I have trouble reading books because of my ADD, but I love that I can get to hear him,
Hmm.
and I definitely plan to have him on the show because
Yeah, he's one of the best. I encourage anybody to take a listen to Shawn Rochester. So,
he can explain it, right. And one of the things he said, and I've been trying to repeat it in my head so I can get it straight, because I want to be able to explain it to other people. It's we have this, I'll say we
mm,
white people, right, have this thought in our head, um, whether it's probably mostly implicit. We because we've a lot of us have done some work to try to at least get rid of explicit racism, right?
mm,
Then that's pretty clear, and it's definitely not socially acceptable, and so a lot of people, but there's still a lot of implicit stuff in there. So it's like when you're walking into a boardroom, right? And if there's two black people in there, you might be fine. But if there's more than two black people in the room, and you know exactly
yeah,
what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter if you feel like you're racist or not, you will probably feel like something is wrong. There's something off about this situation, and I need to correct it.
right.
And so I don't know what it is exactly, but I feel like there's something off about this. And then you go to another situation where there's less black people, and it feels, maybe you'll realize. So try to notice that kind of thing. If it's uncomfortable, if you were to sit at a table of 12 people and 11 of them were black and you were white, would that make you feel uncomfortable? And why?
Exactly.
Why is that, right? Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
It's like, I having grown up in Trinidad, right? I go back often. Trinidad is majoritively, right? People,
Mm.
people of every other race but white. You've got white there, but you've got everything under the sun. It's actually considered one of the most culturally diverse islands and places in the world.
Okay, yeah.
So I would encourage people, if you have the opportunity to travel, purposely put yourself in a country where you are not many of you, where whites are not
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
And you will immediately start to notice that people are staring at you, or they're looking at you, or they're curious about you, or whatever that is. And get uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, like get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and understand that maybe is a way, like you said, sitting in a boardroom where you start to be in the other person's shoe, be in our shoes, and try to see from our eyes and our perspective what it's like for us every single day to be operating in spaces where we don't see ourselves. We're not
Yeah.
reflected enough, you know?
And we don't know what that's like, right? Especially white men, right?
Yeah.
We're reflected in everything,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of people I talk to, a lot of white people I talk to, it just has never occurred to them, right? And so they don't understand, and they don't. It's hard to step out of something that's comfortable
Mm,
if it doesn't affect you.
right.
If there's no, right, if it doesn't affect you, and I think we need to think more as a overall community. That's the only way, because if you keep thinking about yourself, you'll be like, okay, well, yeah, that's not me. But you might think, I care about this situation. I don't want people to get hurt.
Mm.
I don't want people to have less opportunity. But what am I going to do about it? Right? Is what I hear this so much. Right? And it's it's caring about other people. That's
You know,
right. It's really the
the
bottom
word
line.
empathy, it's
Yeah,
I would love for people to understand what being empathetic means. It's not just about saying, oh, you know, I feel bad, or that's just so sad and it's not right, it's not fair. Why is it not right? Why is it not fair? You know, would you, why would you ever want that to happen to anyone? And I think we've lost so much empathy and consideration of one another, that it's funny because let's say if someone had a car accident, you know, and the natural instinct for many of us would be just to go and help without knowing who is driving, what color
that's
they
right.
are, whatever
Yeah.
the case is. And why is it that because we know this is the issue, right? The issue of color and the issue of race, that we are still hesitant to make that same instinctual need to help? Question
Mm,
that too. You know, if you didn't see me, like you're here listening to the podcast and you didn't know my
yeah.
background and you didn't know that I am black and I'm Indian and everything else that I am, you wouldn't treat me any differently, most
Mm-hmm.
likely. But the fact that now you see me, you see that I am visibly different, I sound different, I my experiences are different. Why does that scare you so much? Or why does that give you pause to say, I want to help, but I don't know if I can. Oh, this is not going to change. It has to change. And it's up to us to change it. If we didn't have our forefathers and foremothers fighting these fights for us, from gender, from race, from religious, from you name it, all the issues that we confront, we wouldn't have advanced. It takes us, it takes the brave in us to still feel that fear and still say, this matters. This something must be done, that you need to
Mm-hmm.
start questioning within yourself.
And it's fear. It's fear of retaliation. Is what I'm noticing. Fear of our peers,
Mm.
of hey, of law enforcement,
Yeah.
right? You know, I have the tiniest taste of what it's like to go up against law enforcement when I was in G20 in Toronto, and I just was walking home and I got caught up in protesters on the way home, and I asked the police, hey, where can I go? And they just like sort of said, get out of here. And I felt at risk.
Yeah.
Like that was like 5 minutes of my life for me to experience what every single day is like, you know, for black people, especially in the US, but also in Canada. And we you
Yeah.
know, let's talk about that too, right? We try to pretend
Uh,
like we're saints
I'm
here.
telling you, like it's
Um
the you know, the Canadian. I love
you
us.
posted about this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love us. I'm so proud to be Canadian. I'm proud to be a Trinidadian. I'm a citizen of all three countries, right? So I've achieved a trifecta of sorts in terms of
You
nationality.
have, yeah.
But um, I love Canada. For me, it's home above probably more than anything else. But there is a sentiment of what is the right word? We look down on the US, and
Moral
yes,
superiority.
there's a moral
Yeah.
superiority
That's it.
and condescension that we are
Yes.
better and we don't act like the Americans do, and we don't have this systemic racial problem. And I'm sorry to burst that bubble for us, but please no, check yourselves.
Yeah, we do.
Because we have a
Yeah.
lot of our own country sins that we have yet to atone for fully, you know.
Yes, true.
And even today, you know, I brought up Bill 21 in Quebec. If people don't know what Bill 21, please take the time to read up on what that bill really does and how it restricts people's freedoms and religious freedoms. And it's based on color lines.
Mm-hmm.
It truly is, because the majority of religious symbols are adorned by not whites, non-whites.
Yes.
So and
Women
women
as
specifically,
well.
right?
Yeah.
So I want us Canadians to again, um, just don't sweep the problems that we have under the rug, because we do. Yes, we take the sense of pride that, we are an open country in terms of receiving immigrants and stuff, but our history with immigration is spotty. Okay.
Yes. There's a great if you want to learn about it specifically, there's a great podcast called The Secret Life of Canada. I don't know if you've
No, I never heard
looked
of it.
into
I'll
it at
have to
all.
check it out.
It's there's a I think I think one of the hosts is Jamaican Canadian, and the other host is First Nations.
Okay.
Both women, and they just get into it. There's a whole episode on statues, which is amazing. All the statues are horrible, of racist white men,
Right.
right? Mostly in the world, actually. If you look at statues.
Mm-hmm.
So they get into, the history of slavery in, say, Nova Scotia, the history of people coming from Caribbean countries.
Yep.
To Canada, and how they are treated, and of course, there's a lot
The
of stuff about
internment camps,
Indigenous people.
Japanese internment
No,
camp.
Japanese, exactly, and how the railway was built.
Built.
There's a really good episode on that. So that's, devour that if you're curious about the history of racism in
Africville. We
Canada.
can go on. Like,
There's
there's a
lots,
lot
yes.
to uncover in our own country that we have to atone for, and understand that the fabric and makeup of this country is not far different from the United States. It may not be as volatile now as it was, but we have more covert racism than overt. In the United
Yes.
States, it's
Yeah.
both.
Oh, yeah. It's much
In the
more
United States,
covert.
you've got
Yeah.
overt and covert, but in Canada and Europe, it's very much covert. So you have to understand the biases that you've been raised with. That's, you never really questioned until hopefully now, and start asking yourself, like, for example, I actually learned something today, and it was a white friend of mine, and it was about the term grandfathered in.
Oh, okay.
And the term from the United States, the term grandfathered in actually came from statutes that were passed way back when, to basically, I don't want to speak out of turn, but essentially it was born out of statutes that were passed that excluded Blacks from accessing certain things or being able to vote, something
Oh,
along that line. So the term
okay.
grandfathered in is actually rooted from
From that
from
time.
from Confederate times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So they use that terminology because today I would just say that's something that's been carried forward from a previous
Right.
contract
But
or
the
something like
original
that.
intent of
The,
that
the original
term,
contract
yeah,
was for exclusion.
yeah,
Yeah. There's a lot of terms that people don't, and a lot of it is coming up in the news these days, right? People are like maybe things that would have just sort of passed by.
hmm,
Are now a little more prominent,
yeah.
and being able to be addressed, right? Like things like the Amy Cooper in the park.
I found out she was
You know,
Canadian. I'm like, oh dear gosh.
oh, I know it's
Everyone's like
we
so
don't want to
embarrassed.
we don't want to take full
No.
responsibility for that, but it just it shows, and of course to have a very his last name is Cooper. I forget his
Yes.
first name now.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I do not. It wasn't
No,
Alexander. I don't want to. No, I don't remember.
no.
Unfortunately,
But
or
in
Benjamin,
any
something
case,
like that.
yeah, he like that's another like you said, paid forward, a very successful black person,
Extremely.
right? And she was obviously just profiling him,
Yeah.
and of course she's a horrible person anyway. But
But the fact that you felt threatened, but he wasn't threatening you. He was just telling you
no,
you need to leash your dog. This is a rule, right?
we need to change these reactions, right? If there's a big person, they're going to be intimidating,
Yeah.
no matter what color they are,
And
right?
she needed to
But
understand that
you know
what are the consequences of your actions? Do you understand that that's how Emmett Till was murdered? Because the supposition that he catcalled a white woman, right? You've now put this black man's life in danger over nothing.
Yeah, over nothing. The recent example of, I don't know if you've been seeing this in the news, but the chief, First Nations elder
Yeah.
chief, who got just tackled because his license plate was
Yep.
expired. And there's a plethora of examples of people whose license plates were expired and they got a message on the phone or something about it. What is this? It's not about that. It's obviously about something else.
Well, did you hear about
And
what happened in Atlanta the
what?
night before? So, long story short, black man was sleeping in a drive-through or near a
Yes, the
drive-through at
Wendy's.
Wendy's,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
instead of what they did, they made him like go into a parking lot or whatever, a parking space, and instead of handling that situation where okay, they gave him the test for intoxication, and instead of just calmly saying like maybe let's call you an Uber or maybe let's okay, we will have to
Mm.
take you in. It devolved into a situation where because he might have been intoxicated, we don't know exactly what happened because
Yeah,
the
whatever
whatever
happened.
because the dash cam fell off at one point, the officer's
Of course.
cam.
Body
um,
cam.
it ended up that she's shot to death in the back. Now, why is it shoot to kill? Why
Yeah.
are police at this point where it's we're aiming for shoot to kill? Why if you must shoot, why can't it just shoot to maim? Like that's where my husband and I are like, why is it just
Yeah.
an automatic reaction? Just
If you get shot in the leg or the foot, I mean, you could still die from that, but
right.
it's less likely, but it's also really going to hurt.
Yeah.
And the person is going to be disabled,
Likely,
right?
right?
Likely.
And if the guy's running away with the taser, he's running away. He can't hurt you with the taser. He's running
Yeah.
away with the taser. I'm just kind of like, how many more of this will it take for you to understand this is our life. This is our problem. We live in fear. When we drive our car, I worry that my husband won't come home if he gets pulled over and something like this happens. Like,
And that's why education about, especially about history, will help people understand why things are like they are today. And if we bring it back to finances,
mm,
when people are wondering how does this affect finances, just you just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? The horrible sentence that
oh
everybody
my gosh,
loves
if
to
I can do
say,
it, so can you. I
right? And we don't opportunity makes a big difference in this case.
yes, you're
It really does.
imagine the woman or the man who is black or who is of another race who happens to be queer or bisexual,
Yes.
you know what I mean. Imagine
Or
or
trans.
trans, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine how they're just trying to survive in life and trying to make it an honest day every day, and you've got all of these injustices piled on because of
Yeah.
just who they are and how they choose to live their life. The rest of us who choose to okay, we are straight, we live from a religious perspective, we've married, we've done the
Sure.
the
Yeah.
homogenous life.
Yeah,
We're
that's
not
right.
troubled by any of that, you know and there's that judgment where we say, well, they're lesser than us because they don't choose to live according to our standard, which white people set from the beginning.
The default white
Right.
person
So now we're
standard.
now we're
Yeah.
trying to affect your social order, and that is chaos for everybody else. There's a lot
So
to
that's
unpack.
yeah. There is a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of nuance here, right? So just to that's why take some time to educate yourself,
Yeah.
right? If you're listening to this and you feel like you're out of touch with anything that we're talking about, just start listening and basically start listening to black people, start listening to black voices. Really listen and understand that it is a big difference for me to have parents who are wealthy who can take care of themselves for generations,
Mm,
where things are passed on, not that I have to pass the money back to previous generations or send money home if I'm a new immigrant,
exactly.
or anything like that. Send money home, help my community not get the job that I was going to get, not get the education that I was going to get because I didn't have money, because I didn't qualify for loans, or to be in tons of debt and not be able to get ahead because I had to get loans. There are so many factors here that can be solved by having generational wealth build up.
Yep.
Doesn't even have to be a lot of generational wealth, just a little bit to get you started, and then not having the roadblocks in the way, the barriers to entry for everything, right?
Yep.
And we could have a whole
Uh,
podcast episode about that. But I think for today, I think we're good.
yeah.
We'll stop it. I really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, likewise. Thanks for having me here. It's a needed conversation that has to be ongoing, and I appreciate that you welcomed me
Ongoing, yes.
onto your forum and in your platform. So thank you.
Well, you will be on for, I want people to know your story too, because it seems like, oh, you're doing great, right? You got the money, but there's a lot of roadblocks along the way, and we talked about one or two of them but there's a lot of things that happen, and then even the concept of being multi-skilled and multi-talented and having multiple sources of income. That's something I want to talk about too, all in another show.
Sure.
For today, we're good. So, talking about COVID-19, how it's been affecting the world, and how it's led to these riots and protests, because the people are not being treated equally in the world. And hey, if it takes a pandemic to bring it back into light, so be it. I mean, I wish that wasn't the case. But now that it's all in the forefront again, let's keep talking about it and try to make change.